Hi, my name is Dr. Patrick O'Haron. I am a medical doctor, and I'm also the board president of Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility. Oregon PSR is an organization that's dedicated to protecting human health from the gravest threats, such as nuclear war and climate change. Our chapter is in Oregon on the West Coast of the United States. We have two areas around nuclear power, particularly that have led to our group focusing on nuclear power issues, as well as other things. One is that we, centered in Portland, are downriver from the Hanford nuclear site, where the waste products from producing nuclear weapons in the mid 20th century still are being dealt with, and it's right on the Columbia River, so that goes right by Portland. And any contaminated water from the Hanford site ends up in the Pacific Ocean. Also, being on the West Coast, we are near the Pacific Ocean, and we know that ocean ecosystems are all interconnected, and that fish that may, salmon that might spawn 1,000 miles inland could end up feeding almost anywhere in the Pacific Ocean and then coming back here. So we see bioaccumulation of radioactive compounds in fish over time, and that affects anyone who catches or eats one of those fish, whether they are in Asia or in North America. So I would like to speak right now about a proposal to deal with some of the contaminated water at the Fukushima Daiichi plant in Fukushima, Japan. There is a proposal to release some of the so-called treated water from that facility into the Pacific Ocean. And just to take a step back, at Oregon Physicians for Social Responsibility, we really consider nuclear power to be a false solution for climate change. And there's a number of reasons for that. One is building new nuclear reactors is not carbon neutral. It actually requires a huge amount of energy. It's a massive project to get a nuclear plant online, whereas putting up wind and solar can be done incrementally. And also, we do not have a solution for nuclear waste. So we've really been, we're about 70 years into this nuclear experiment that certain nations have subjected all of humanity to, and we're really starting to see these problems catch up with us. So we do not have a long-term solution for nuclear waste, and the earthquake and tsunami off the coast of Fukushima really demonstrated just how dangerous this can be. It's easy to think of the Fukushima disaster as something that happened, but I think it's important to understand it's something that's happening. So nuclear reactions don't just stop, and that continues. Those reactions are still going on, and they require water to cool them down so they don't melt down. That water is once it's used for cooling, especially in the situation where you've already had an accident and there's damage, is very radioactive. And so it is a huge problem trying to figure out what to do with that water. And I can understand that it's an attractive solution to just dump that water into the ocean. That would be easy, with the idea being it just gets diluted and goes away. But we know that that is not the case. So there's a couple really important issues. One is that most of the focus on, or the things I've seen on the treated water at Fukushima would claim that really there's only high levels of the isotope of hydrogen, the tritium isotope. But there's credible reports that there are a number of other radioactive compounds in that water after the treatment process. And then the other thing is, I mean, there is some controversy in the scientific literature about whether tritium is safe. I mean, tritium does occur naturally, as do other radioactive compounds, but they don't occur in the kind of concentrations that we see. And tritium as a hydrogen atom can be incorporated into our bodies, particularly if it's incorporated in DNA as it breaks down. Radioactive decay causes cell damage. If that affects your DNA, I mean, that's how we get cancer. So I think that it's impossible to say that it's safe. I mean, that's basically impossible to prove. So, but really it's way too early for us to say conclusively that these things are safe. So that's, and I guess the question is that a risk we're willing to take? I don't think that makes any sense. Like in medicine, in public health, we use the precautionary principle when making these sorts of decisions, which is to err on the side of caution. So if we're thinking about doing something and we're not sure if it's going to harm someone, we should err on the side of avoiding harm, which in this case would not be releasing water that's been treated and still has high levels of tritium and a number of other radioactive compounds into the Pacific Ocean, where it will enter the ocean ecosystem, get concentrated, from plankton to small fish to big fish, and then we eat those fish, and it just continues to get concentrated to potentially harmful or unsafe levels. And there are other possible solutions. I mean, it's important to note that none of these solutions are going to be easy, but this is a situation we're in. It's too late to say like building nuclear reactors was a bad idea. I mean, it's not too late to say that, but we have a bunch of nuclear reactors we have to deal with, and in this case, the Fukushima reactor has been damaged, and we have to deal with it. But there are options other than just dumping this radioactive water into the ocean. So you could store it in large tanks, much like you see. I mean, here in Portland, we have a tank farm where things like oil and gasoline are stored. So large, like 100,000 cubic meter storage tanks on the facility could be constructed and store decades worth of water and buy some time to figure out other ways to more permanently store them. You can also do a process called, I think it's called mortification, where it's essentially you make cement with the water, and that keeps it so it can't go anywhere. The half-life of tritium is not that long compared to other radioactive compounds. So if it can be in cement for decades, it'll be much safer, and it's not gonna flow into the ocean. Those are just two possible solutions. But I think I think there's sort of two levels in which dumping this radioactive water into the ocean is really problematic. The first is obviously that it's harmful. The other one is it allows us to continue in this sort of way of thinking where we can ignore the fact that nuclear waste from energy generation is incredibly toxic to humans. And as long as we can just like look away from it, it seems like it is an attractive potential solution. So we have a huge problem in Fukushima. We need to look directly at it, and just dumping treated water into the ocean is not looking directly at the problem. It's burying our head in the sand and wanting it to go away. And every nation that touches the Pacific Ocean has an interest in the Pacific Ocean continuing to have clean, non-radioactive water. And there are better solutions.